So, Sarah, let's start with the really massive project you undertook, I guess, about a little bit over a year ago. What was that project?
Yes, about a year ago, I started asking Vox readers to send me their emergency room bills, mostly because those prices that are charged at emergency rooms or charged anywhere in our healthcare system are kept secret. And I wanted to, write about them. And so far, I've collected about 2,000 bills. I've read about 1,300 of them at this point. So, yeah, I've spent a lot of the past year collecting and reading a lot of stories from the emergency room.
That sounds like a total nightmare, and but I'm fascinated by this because I had an emergency room visit. Maybe I guess it was about a year and a half ago, and the whole billing process was bizarre. Nothing was serious on my part at all, so I'm perfectly healthy. So I found this fascinating. But before we go into the specifics of an emergency room, like what is this opaque quality to billing? What is it different for the emergency room than it is for sort of, I guess, the hospital's general services? Like what is going on with this dynamic where, it's like I'm going to order off the menu, but we can't tell you how much it's going to cost until after you finish your meal?
Yeah, I think part of it is symptomatic of the larger system, but then there are some things that are unique about the ER space. I think what's symptomatic of the system is the fact that it's impossible to know the prices of healthcare before you go. And, if you think of any other goods you shop for, if you were going to the mechanic to fix your car, if you're going to a restaurant, you would want to know the prices of, the repairs on your car, but you can't know the prices on the repairs you're getting done for yourself. So I think that is a general feature of the American healthcare system that is quite bad for patients. I think what's unique about the emergency room is twofold. One is that people are going there often not by their own choice. They're transported by ambulance. They're dealing with some kind of emergency. Often I read bills from people who, didn't have an emergency, but it was a holiday, it was the weekend, it was after work, and the ER was the only place open. So I think that's one of the dynamics that's, specific to the ER is that people are often not making a choice. It's just the place they end up. And I think what's different is you have all these sort of providers in the ER, and this is something I've written about a lot, who might not be in network with, even though you're at an in-network hospital. So it's one of the places, one study has found that 1 in 5 ER visits results in a surprise bill from a doctor who was working at an in-network ER but wasn't in network with insurance. So there are certain things that happen, specifically in the ER and some that are more symptomatic of our larger problems.
Well, let's start with that larger problem, and then we'll work our way down to that. I mean, I know there's been, there's obviously been people who have explored this, but why? I still can't quite understand why the pricing is so opaque. Like, how did it develop in that way? How did someone say, like, oh, I know what we'll do. Let's just make up, it feels like it's random prices, and see what sticks, and not tell any of the buyers, because we don't want the idea that maybe somebody else paid half for this same procedure to inhibit the next person from paying double.
Yeah, it is a pretty Rube Goldberg-esque system that I don't think any healthcare wonk would have devised. I think, when I look at the source of this, I think it's something that's different about us from most developed countries in, nearly every other developed country, and not just European countries, not just, ones with larger welfare states, but places like Singapore or Hong Kong, also Canada, Britain, European countries. They have a government entity that regulates healthcare prices. And they do this because they see healthcare as just as important as electricity or gas. It's something you need to survive, and therefore the government is going to step in and, set prices, because patients can't really, when it's your life at stake, you really don't have much negotiating power. The United States has made the decision not to have that kind of price regulation. That essentially leaves health insurers and hospitals to negotiate, what they think is a fair price for everything from an appendectomy to a primary care visit to an ER trip. And no one in that system really has an interest in making things more transparent. Like you mentioned, Sam, a lot of people are quite proprietary, particularly the hospitals and the insurers. They don't want their competitors to know what rate they got, and they want to keep that information secret. And unfortunately, there really isn't any forcing mechanism to make that public. That's why I started this whole project. The only way to find out, what is actually being paid at emergency rooms is to look at the bills that patients have received. That's really the only way I could think of to do this. I wish there were an easier one, because reading ER bills all day is not the easiest way to do this, but that's unfortunately the best that we have right now.
Well, I mean, there is maybe an easier one. You had touched on it in terms of government regulation, but let's put a pin in that for a minute. But what is it about this? Is it just simply, I mean, in terms of emergency rooms, like, this is not a planned purchase, right? I mean, this is, it's extremely spontaneous, but what is it? Is it just that makes it, I mean, why is there a market, a so-called market failure, or maybe just an inability for a market to deal with this type of service? Because we don't have this problem with, cleaners, with, dry cleaners, or with, I don't know, hotels, or, there's no other service that seems analogous to hospitals when it comes to pricing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, I think what's different about it is healthcare is the only service you would purchase while unconscious. I wrote a story yesterday that involved a patient who was having a blinding migraine. She literally could not see. She managed to tap in 911 on her phone, was taken to a hospital that turned out to be out of network. And one of the things she said to me, which, made me laugh a little bit, but was also just terrible, was saying, I don't think I could have avoided this. I literally could not see when I was, when this decision was being made about where I was going to go. So I think that's, one of the things that's different about the healthcare system, certainly different about the emergency room, is patients often aren't making the choice to go there. They don't have much choice. So you see some behaviors similar to what a monopoly might do when they don't have competition. You end up with these really high prices.
And even when it's not an emergency, the dynamic of competition doesn't kick in the same way, because we don't treat healthcare like we treat other commodities, at least as we don't perceive ourselves as consumers as much as we can perceive ourselves as patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when you're thinking as a patient, your hope is to get the best care possible, to get better, especially in emergency situations. I think it's very challenging and I think another factor layered on top of this is most of the people you interact with in a hospital, in an emergency room, they won't even be able to tell you what it's going to cost. If you ask your provider, how much is that ultrasound, how much is that CAT scan, they probably won't know the answer, and they probably will not tell you the answer because it's just not something that they deal with. So, I think a lot of times I get questions after doing this project about, well, how can I avoid a surprise ER bill? And unfortunately, there aren't great ways to do it, and I feel like it's a really unfair burden to put on patients, that, along with trying to get treatment, you're also trying to navigate the system in a system where you have very little power to say no or go somewhere else.
All right. Well, let's take a break and let's start. Let's talk about some of the I guess the highlights, the lowlights of what you found about this experience. Some of this, like I say, not terribly surprising to me, as I experienced something like this, and it was pretty shocking. But we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Sarah Kliff just after this.